So a long time ago, I said I was going to make a video about whether or not children should be sheltered, and this is me making that video.
You're watching the League of Cloaks, Oaks.
Now, I've heard a lot of different viewpoints on this topic from a lot of people I respect, as well as a few idiots, and there are a lot of things to consider in this discussion, so for the sake of lucidity, I'm going to start with just my own perspective. Now, I've told you guys quite a lot already about the way I was raised, so if you've seen any of my other videos, it should be no surprise to you that I was very, very sheltered. I was homeschooled all the way through high school, specifically so that I would not be influenced by the secular world. And my family, for the longest time in my childhood, attended this really small, charismatic, non-denominational church, whatever that means. So for the majority of my childhood, my reality was one of severely biased Christian textbooks and prayer meetings in our living room with well-meaning people who like to anoint your forehead with oil and speak in tongues really loudly, and occasionally like to dance around the room like so many primitive Mayans offering up a human sacrifice. In terms of movies, I was allowed to watch predominantly VeggieTales, Toy Story, The Jungle Book, and an odd assortment of creationist nature films. If a movie was rated higher than G, it was almost guaranteed not to be allowed in our house. And that's not even to say, though, that all G-rated films were allowed. Like, seriously, I was not allowed to see Mulan. My parents wouldn't let me buy Finding Nemo because Ellen DeGeneres was a lesbian. They didn't even tell me it was because she was gay, or what gay even meant for that matter. They just told me she was an ungodly woman. I wasn't allowed to watch anything with any sort of foul language or violence. I didn't even know that stuff existed in movies until like high school. And can I just take a second to point out the counterproductive nature of the way violence is portrayed in movies? We have this weird mindset that you can't put violence in kids' movies unless it's off camera. If someone gets stabbed, we see a brief shot of the sword plunging toward them, and then it cuts to their face, where we get a nice prolonged close-up, preferably in slow-mo. As someone gets shot, we see a generic close-up of the trigger being pulled, a flash, some smoke wafting from the barrel of the gun, then the person probably just falls over and we never even really see any blood. Look, I understand the urge to protect your kids from the emotional trauma of seeing violence in all its glory. But when you censor violence for them in movies, you're not helping them. You are giving them a false perception of death. We soften it for them, and we paint them a fantastical false picture of reality, full of puppies and rainbows, where death only ever happens with perfect timing and probably in slow motion so we have time to digest everything emotionally. All this accomplishes is to leave the kid ill-equipped to deal with the real world where real death and real violence happen frequently. Now, I'm not saying that you should just let your kids watch whatever they want all the time, or that you should make them watch violent movies, but guide them through the process. I mean, if they're too scared to watch it, don't make them watch it. You certainly don't want to cause them nightmares, but don't hide things from them merely for the sake of protecting their innocence. Because while innocence is a beautiful thing and we hate to see our children lose it, it is not the source of beauty, and it is, in fact, something that our children must lose for their own good. Innocence, I would argue, is not nearly so beautiful in a person as a well-developed sense of reality, and you cannot learn to deal with reality if you are being given a false impression of it by your parents. You know, I can pinpoint exactly when I lost my innocence in terms of violence, and it wasn't actually until like 2 years ago. I don't remember how in God's name I got there, but somehow I found myself on a website with a picture of a man in Pakistan who had died in a bus bombing. When the bomb exploded, this man had been thrown from the bus and he had landed in the street. His head was split outward in about 5 different places, and it looked like if someone were to take a half-rotten cantaloupe and just smash it against the pavement. I honestly couldn't really feel anything at first. I was too shocked to really even move, and when I did, I scrolled down, and the next thing on the page was just as bad. It was a picture of a woman who had been trapped inside the bus and had burned alive. And something that I didn't realize about the human body when it is burned that thoroughly all over is that it loses its definable features. The flesh seems to just sort of almost melt down and liquefy and meld with all the other flesh around it. It loses its contour and its shapeliness, and it begins to look more like a lame Play-Doh representation of a human body. And in this case, the woman's skin looked like burnt cinnamon toast, and it cracked, and there were like this oozy yellow stuff underneath. The final thing that I saw on this website was actually a video of a man being beheaded with a small knife. I don't think this was related to the other pictures in any way, and I don't know who the man was, but as you can imagine, the process of cutting a man's head off with a small knife is not exactly neat. It wasn't particularly speedy either, and there was a lot of hacking and sawing and jabbing and more blood than I knew was contained in the human body. And I remember seeing them sever the last tendon in the man's neck, and they took his head and they stuffed it into a sack. And it was exactly at that moment that I sprinted for the bathroom. I didn't throw up, but I sat there for a good 10 minutes dry heaving and wondering why I was suddenly so out of breath. And for the next 2 or 3 weeks after that, I would randomly remember those images at unforeseeable times and be beset by the need to hurl again. And here's the thing, I'm not saying that you should show that to your kids, or that can even compare to seeing it in real life. But you need to understand that those images are reality. That's what we have to be prepared to deal with in life. It's not pretty, but it's something that we have to understand. And if we shelter our kids from death and violence to the point where they don't know what it feels like or what it looks like, we have tangibly weakened them, and we have left them psychologically unprepared to deal with the world into which they were born. So that's actually all for this video. I had a lot more to say on this topic than I anticipated, so I've decided to split it into 2 parts. So next week you'll either get to see part 2 of this video or a review of Star Trek Into Darkness, depending on what I'm in the mood for. In the meantime, feel free to check out last week's video and hit me up on Facebook and Twitter and tell me how stupid I am, all that good stuff. And those links are below in the description. So thank you everybody, and victory.